So many of us working in trade were pleased to see the news on May 8th that the US and the UK had reached an agreement in principle for an economic prosperity deal. CSI members were big supporters of the US-UK FTA in the first Trump administration, and ever since President Biden shelved negotiations, we've been advocating for talks to be revived. This latest outline of a deal may look different from the 2019 draft, but we're very pleased to see that it is expected to feature digital trade as well as financial services provisions. To help us walk through the possible contours of agreement, we're very fortunate to have with us today a top representative from the UK Embassy, Deputy Chief of Mission James Roscoe, to answer some of our questions. And joining him to provide a private sector perspective from the UK, we welcome Miles Selleck, CEO of the British Financial Services Trade Association, TheCityUK. And let me provide a few details on James's background. Before taking up his current role in Washington in July of 2022, James served for several years as the UK ambassador to the UN General Assembly. And previously he held roles in communications for the Cabinet Office, the Royal Household of Her Majesty, the Queen, and the Prime Minister's Office. And earlier in his career, he had diplomatic postings to Sierra Leone and Iraq. In short, he's had the kind of experience that makes Washington, D.C. look pretty manageable. So turning to Miles Selleck, Miles has headed up the TheCityUK since 2016, but he began his career in broadcasting, working in radio and television for the BBC and others. And he moved on to a post in the UK Parliament, where he focused on foreign affairs and defense issues, and later worked at HSBC and Prudential. So we're pleased to hear from them both. And I'll turn things over now to our moderator, Christy.
Thanks so much for your introduction, Sarah. And before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words. Given the advanced services economies in both the UK and the US, we at CSI think an agreement between the two countries would allow us to set a very high standard for trade disciplines on both digital and financial services, one that could serve as a template for other negotiations. So I want to share a few of CSI's priorities for a bilateral digital trade agreement, which would also, a bilateral agreement which would include digital trade provisions, which we understand would also cover financial services. As a starting point, we expect an agreement should include core disciplines like promoting data flows, banning data localization, and upholding a permanent moratorium on e-commerce duties. On a related note, we would want a commitment to rescind the digital services taxes. We also think there's room to include some important disciplines on financial services, including national treatment, MFN, and market access. We'd also like to incorporate innovative commitments on electronic payments, including language encouraging interoperability and promoting the use of international standards in e-payments. So I wanted to share these ideas at the outset to frame the conversation, and I certainly also want to underscore CSI's strong interest in pressing forward on the US-UK negotiations. We were big supporters of the trade negotiations in the first Trump administration, and we were dismayed to see the Biden administration step away after so much progress had been made. But we are hopeful that this will mark a new start. And now, without further ado, let's begin our discussion. It would be invaluable to hear from each of you, James and Miles, your perspectives on what has been achieved and what can be achieved in a US-UK bilateral agreement. First, how does the agreement fit into the UK's broader diplomatic and economic objectives? So, interested in both of your perspectives on that.
Brilliant. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and many thanks for the introduction. I don't know what about wartime Iraq and Sierra Leone you thought would prepare me for Washington, Sarah, but certainly my time in Downing Street and in the Palace showed me just how important the US-UK relationship is. It is the cornerstone relationship for us both in terms of security and intelligence, but also in terms of economy, and the connections between these two countries are so essential. And that, I think, is why we were top of the queue for the trade deal, because we do have this incredible relationship with the US, but also the US recognized that we came to the negotiation with already balanced trade. And one of the things the president is obviously keen to, from his perspective, correct, is what he sees as trade imbalances. We didn't offer a trade imbalance, so we were able to pursue an economic deal which looked at the problem from a different perspective, I think. And so I think from our perspective, this economic partnership is the beginning. The first thing we wanted to do was deal with the sectoral issues, which are mainly goods issues, which I know people in this room are not too concerned about, but affected us enormously in terms of auto, in terms of steel and aluminium, in terms of pharma, and in terms of aerospace. So those are the four areas that we were principally concerned to address immediately. But as you say, in the deal, we also set out an ambition to do more together in the financial services space and in the digital services space. And we are trying to push that forward at pace with a number of US partners who are clearly engaged in a number of discussions all at the same time, which is quite complicated. But from our perspective, our key focus is going to be taking forward progress on financial services and on digital services. And we've got a number of conversations we're having at the moment. We're talking to the Treasury and to other regulatory bodies in the US about how we can work together on things like financial services sandboxes. We've got some really interesting sandbox work going on in the UK. I saw today the US just announced an AI financial services sandbox with NVIDIA, which is really interesting. I think we would be very interested in looking at a UK-US transatlantic sandbox to see where we can look to reduce friction between our two economies in the financial services space and in the digital space. But I think the key thing for this room is, as you say, we put down in the document in a way that is, which is in lights, that we want to make progress in not just goods, not just market access, but also on increasing digital trade, on increasing access for other world-leading industries in the services space, and also making sure we make progress on environmental standards and procurement, and strengthen our work around economic security as well. So it's a broad-ranging deal, but it's the headline terms of a much deeper deal. And our job now is to drive it forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Miles.
So look, this is already the most successful financial services relationship on the planet, and it's already the most successful relationship in terms of services trade in many ways. So I think everybody in this room will be very familiar with the fact that the US is the #1 exporter of services globally, and the UK is the #2 exporter. And if you look at the relationship in financial services, again, the closest relationship of any two countries anywhere in the world. The two top financial services centers consistently and for a long time have been London and New York. And there's this sort of very friendly rivalry and competition, but also cooperation between the two centers. You can see this in the ZYEN survey that over many years, for as long as that survey has run, London and New York are the top two centers, and occasionally they will sort of swap position, but in essence it's very clear in terms of the lead. So the challenge for this deal and the challenge as we go forward is how we build on success, and that's a great challenge to have, and it's one that we at TheCityUK are really focused on building on. And I think there are two things when we think of this from the economic perspective and the regulatory perspective, is what are the really specific, really granular areas where we can drive cooperation even further and avoid complacency in the strength of the relationship, but also how do we maintain a strategic sense of direction, that we're really bold and really ambitious, and we take the EPD and we build on it. And so the EPD is just a staging post. I would slightly disagree with James. I don't even see it as a beginning. This is part of a long-term relationship that has been hugely successful and has set the global gold standard. So we would say, when you look at the specifics, you've talked absolutely rightly, Christine, about the digital economy opportunities. I would love to see the FCA in the UK streamline the senior manager regime to make it easier for people coming from American financial services companies to go to London. If the idea is that these are the two most sophisticated international financial centers in the world, then surely if somebody somebody has been approved by the New York regulator to work at the top end of Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan or Citigroup, that they should be fast-tracked through the UK regulatory system, because ultimately our business is a people business. And then it's looking at the issues around data localization. It's looking absolutely rightly, as James says, at the digital sandbox. But how does that then turn into hard action and real opportunity that comes out of the digital sandbox? There's no point in having really exciting ideas that emerge from the digital sandbox just die quietly in a corner without the appropriate financing. So how do we drive that? And then from a more strategic perspective, the Financial Regulatory Working Group between US Treasury and His Majesty's Treasury has been a huge asset since it was set up. It was set up during the period of Brexit as an information sharing exercise. Our view is let's have industry, and there is huge support for this both from the British and the American industries. We've been having meetings with them while we've been in town, and we'll have more meetings in New York tomorrow. So support to take that group and turn it into a genuinely strategic group, a genuinely strategic gathering that thinks about how we drive the relationship over the long term to deepen it and be really ambitious.
And from CSI perspective, we absolutely second that. And we have been very supportive in working with you and with the BAB and really promoting that idea. So here, we're very supportive of that. I think you've already answered to some degree the next question I was going to ask, Miles. I was going to ask if you could address the key priorities for your members in the City UK. I think you've covered that to some degree, but I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing here is that the relationship between the US and the UK is only going to go from strength to strength. So the US has been the largest single market for UK exports, UK financial services exports, since about 2017. So Brexit has accelerated that process, but it was happening anyway. And exports to the US are growing by just about 13% on average over the last few years. They've been growing to the European Union, but the gap is growing bigger. So this is a huge opportunity for our industry to deepen the relationship. I think in terms of just adding to some of the points that I've raised regarding other opportunities through the EPD, what's really interesting about the mention of financial services in the EPD is it's almost a placeholder. It's there so we can build on it. And I think this then goes back to conversations we've been having in town over the last 24 hours about having the appropriate ambition, but also not losing sight of the granularity. So I've put forward, some potential ideas. We are very open as industry to work with the authorities, whether they're regulators, whether they're legislators, whether they're government departments, to really drive this collectively. And I think it needs the private sector to be brought in a really partnership style of activity by the public sector, by the treasuries, to really help drive this.
And again, we would absolutely endorse that. And it's something that we've been supporting and working toward along with you. James, we've heard from Miles. What does the UK government see as doable with respect to financial services?
So I think just to pick on what Miles just said, we had meetings last week of our financial services regulatory group, both with the US Treasury and also with US regulators. It is such an important dialogue. And in terms of what the UK is thinking about next, we will in July publish our financial services growth and competitiveness strategy for the UK. And it is absolutely the case that those conversations and some of the ideas coming out of those conversations will be in that strategy. I think it's fair to say, and I know you guys feel this, but for a very long time, we feel like we have regulated for risk. This is a UK government that wants to regulate for growth. Now, that doesn't mean throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're still concerned about risk, but the emphasis needs to be on growth. And I think that once you see that strategy issued, it will genuinely be offering reductions in regulatory complexity in the UK and in doing business in the UK. We're going to set up a one-stop hub, which US financial services businesses can go to in the UK to get answers to the challenges and questions that they have, which is also a great place for us to collate some of the friction that's in the system and work out how we address it from a UK US perspective. We really want to support innovation across the sector. So the hub, again, is going to absorb innovative ideas and try and implement them where we can. And finally, it's going to really try and drive growth through expanding consumer access in the UK to new financial services products. And we've been really excited by the arrival of Robinhood in the UK and the offer that they make to UK citizens. It's a ridiculously low number of Brits who actually engage with the stock market in the UK, for example. So innovation in that space is what we want to see in the financial sector. So there are 5 priority areas: fintech, asset management, insurance, capital markets, and sustainable finance. In all of those areas, you will see elements in this growth strategy that should be encouraging you. And in all of this, we will continue to collaborate with the US to make sure we stay as far as we can competitive, because we like the competitiveness. It drives innovation, it drives change, it drives improvements, but in lockstep as far as we can to make both industries as interoperable as possible.
So again, we at CSI you mentioned regulatory sandboxes, which again, we think it's incredibly important in the financial services area. And so we're very encouraged by comments from both of you on that, which we think is incredibly important. But also just continuing on in financial services, what do you see of the prospects for including disciplines on financial services as part of the agreement? Traditional disciplines, you mentioned new products, which is of course an important element of the financial services chapter in our FTAs. What do you see the prospects for the more traditional disciplines on financial services?
I think we are open to anything which our partners in industry in these sectors say could improve the prospects for both the UK and the US economically. So I think come to us with ideas. As Mar said, we've got a long-standing, brilliant relationship. What the economic partnership is trying to do is signal strongly that that is a sector that we want to really push forward on and make progress on. So I think we are willing to not leave any stone unturned. So if anyone in this room has ideas, Tom, I'm going to force you to stand up, and Megan, go on, both of you, stand up. These are 2 of our brilliant people. Tom works for our treasury, Megan works on our trade team. Come and talk to them about ideas you have. Talk to me about ideas you have. Talk to Miles, because obviously it's literally his job, and we will see what we can do.
That's very encouraging.
I would
Miles.
completely agree with James, not least on how fantastic his team is. I think the point here is I'm going to do the classic Oxford tutorial thing of arguing with the question. I'm not sure there is a traditional discipline in financial services anymore. We are a tech industry now. 85% of the exports in financial services are rendered digitally. The former CEO of Barclays said that Barclays is now basically a data business with a banking license attached. So I think what we need to look at this through the prism of is exactly as James says, where are the opportunities, irrespective of where those might be. And I think the other thing that's interesting here is we are moving on from an era where an FTA was the only solution or the only answer. And you'll know this better than anybody in terms of the fantastic work that CSI does and GSI does. So let's look at what's possible in other formats, whether those are digital economy agreements, whether those are deals like the Berne Agreement between the UK and Switzerland, which is a mutual recognition agreement. And I would argue probably the gold standard in terms of that sort of regulatory cooperation, but also the state level MOUs that we've seen that the UK has signed with a number of states here in the US. Insurance, I'm a recovering insurer. Insurance is a state level regulated business. There's a huge opportunity, I think, here between the UK and the US to see what's possible, particularly as insurance starts moving up the technological ladder as well. So I think there is everything to play for.
Could you both speak to potential coordination between the US and the UK on AI, either generally or specific to financial services, to really follow on your point about we need to maybe think about more out of the box in this
Yes,
context.
and this is where I think sandbox, digital economy agreements, the ability to think more widely and I think more innovatively. I mean, you know, one of the other things that the UK and the US shares, not just that we are the two leading financial centres in the world, we're also the two leading university centres in the world. If you look at the top 50 universities globally, it is dominated by British and American universities. I think I'm right in saying the top 10 is solely British and American universities. And there is a role here for finance to be able to support innovation in universities, to commercialize those opportunities, I think particularly somewhere like the UK. But also, again, this goes back to talent. So I would love to see it become even easier for talent to move between the UK and the US when it comes to AI, when it comes to tech, when it comes to financial elements. I don't like using the term fintech anymore because ultimately the entire industry is now fintech. We have moved into a different space. So I think this is about minimizing the barriers that are in the way and looking at what we can do that helps improve the accessibility of talent, of finance, of technology. And this is one of the reasons why we have been particularly at TheCityUK pushing the need to avoid things like data localization. We think that's an incredibly damaging step. We were very pleased when the UK government negotiated with the Japanese FTA, which was in essence a rollover of the EU-Japan FTA. There had originally been a provision in there that explicitly set in place data localization requirements between the EU and Japan. That still exists. The UK deal, at the insistence of the British government, which we were incredibly grateful for, removed that completely. And that's changed the nature of how we can help develop a lot of the ambitions that we have in terms of the relationship with Japan, for instance, in financial services.
Can I just say on
Go,
that?
no,
I mean,
go ahead, please.
that's a really good example of where the state can actually get in the way of business if it does the wrong thing. But if you tell the state what will help and what will deliver a different outcome, we can try and deliver it. So, keep those channels into us open, keep the channels into Miles open, and where you can see the opportunity for us to do something differently, we are literally, I cannot tell you how committed our Chancellor and our Prime Minister are to growth in the UK economy and how central our financial services are. So 83% of the UK's employed people are in some way driven by our financial services sector. It accounts for a huge part of our economy, a huge part of our national income. So everything we can do to improve the way that you guys operate that is reasonable and sensible, we will try and take forward.
Thank you. Back to the topic of digital trade. USTR has expressed disappointment that the UK did not agree to withdraw its DST as part of the initial announcement. James, how do you see this figuring into the ongoing negotiations? And also, if I can mention another wrinkle, is Section 899 in the big beautiful tax bill. So, if to the extent you can comment that, and also welcome your thoughts, Miles.
So I have to say, I've not heard USTR express that disappointment to us, and perhaps they are disappointed. What I would say is, I think we're aware of the concern on the US government side. We think it's a reasonable tax. We think that it closes a loophole in terms of ensuring that people who do business in the UK pay proper tax on that profit. But the right place to have that discussion is probably between our Treasury and the US Treasury. And we are very happy to take that discussion forward in that format. And I know that when our Chancellor saw Secretary Besant recently, they had a discussion that touched on this. So we think Treasury to Treasury is the best place to have that discussion. And we should just crack on with the EPD because it's in our best interest on both sides to just make progress now. On the big beautiful bill, I think this is, I think the US is hearing loud and clear from businesses that this has a chilling effect on people thinking about doing business in the US as a foreign company. And that just can't be a good idea. I think the uncertainty it creates for businesses thinking about investing in the US is not a good thing. And I hope that they will reconsider it.
On DST, I mean, that one's outside our pay grade. What I would say is that where there is friction and consistency, a lack of simplification, our view is that there needs to be an appropriate approach. But on 899, I'd very much agree with what James has said. The challenge here is that you've got an approach that is going to be taxing transactions in many ways rather than income. As James says, it will have a chilling effect. It will have a chilling effect on investment. And I think there is also a risk of significant inconsistency. So this is a bill that will have tax implications for British companies and other companies from countries that are signed up to the OECD principles. China is not signed up to the OECD principles. This will not have an effect on Chinese companies in the way that will have on British companies or other companies from countries that aren't signed up to those. So we would want to see a much more thoughtful approach taken on that minimizes the impact and we would argue a substantial detrimental economic risk to not just the US but the UK as well.
Right. No one, we're appreciative of that as much as we want to see DST is eliminated. But we realize this is something that has to be carefully worked through. And then finally, let's turn to economic security. And James, could you tell us more about how the two sides might cooperate on economic security initiatives? For example, export controls are expanding very rapidly in the US. Do you expect the UK to fully align? Will there be points of departure?
So I think, if you look at the economic partnership deal, there is a reference and there a strong reference to us collaborating with the US on economic security. And this isn't a new thing. We worked very closely with the last administration on economic security. And I know you had a discussion on this subject before lunch. It is clear from a sort of wider strategic perspective that China poses a risk to us in terms of Western democracies, and it poses a risk in a number of different ways. And we want to do what we can to de-risk that relationship. I think that doesn't mean closing the door on China. I think that would also be a risk, frankly, to the global economy. But it means finding the right balance in our trading relationship and in our broader relationship with China. So we will continue to work with the US to make sure that we are doing the right things to control the flow of capital from our financial centers into China. We don't want to give China an advantage in areas where we don't want them to have an advantage. I think we will continue to look at the risks of our trading relationship with China and where we need to try and de-risk that. I think we'll need to look at the flow of Chinese capital into the UK and what they're investing in and what we're sending to them. And again, making sure we're de-risking that. And I think when it comes to critical national infrastructure, you need to think very carefully about the national security risks of Chinese investment. So it's a difficult picture. I think what we will often do with the US is try and understand what outcome we're trying to achieve. And we will, in our own way, try and deliver that outcome. I don't think we necessarily need to be identical in our methodology, as long as we're achieving a similar outcome. But I think there's a flip side to this coin as well. And that's about deepening the technological partnership between the UK and the US, between the US and its allies. At the same time as we're concerned about our adversaries, we need to come together to work with our allies. So one of the things you'll see in the economic partnership deal is the commitment to doing a tech deal between the UK and the US. And that's something we want to also make progress on very quickly. That's something where we could look particularly at frontier tech, at AI, at quantum, at chip IP, at biotech, areas where, as Miles says, because of our brilliant universities and research, both our countries have real advantages, and both our countries could enhance those advantages by working together. The UK, outside of the US, the UK is the only Western democracy that has $1 trillion tech industry. And our argument is that if we could bring those two closer together, get rid of the friction, as Miles says, as in financial services, can we move people more easily between the UK and the US? Can we move capital more easily between the UK and the US in the tech space? So that's for us, that's the next frontier in terms of our deal with the US. Let's take forward the economic partnership deal, but let's really get this tech partnership working.
I just would add to that I think business is looking for clarity. So the more clarity there is over what is considered in scope or questioned in terms of relationships, economic relationships with certain partners such as China. We, from an industry perspective, will await to see what outward bound investment screening and UK complementary approaches and outward bound investment screening will look like over time. I think the economic security issue is clearly higher and higher up the agenda on both sides of the Atlantic. I was very privileged to be part of the recent Strategic Defence Review in the UK that absolutely looked at economic security and business resilience as a part of that. And so I see the role of financial services and the kinds of firms that we have in professional services and financial services in our membership as being part of a whole of society solution to economic security. If you look at the expertise on resilience, if you look at the expertise on cyber, if you look at the expertise on how we protect our companies and our critical infrastructure, a lot of that sits not within the state, a lot of that sits within the private sector, but neither one can do this individually or by themselves. It needs a partnership between both. And I would want to see ideally a partnership, not just between the private sector in the UK and the state in the UK, but a clearer partnership between the UK and the US and other trusted allies on these sorts of issues. So I think we need to look at the private sector's ability to step up and support the democratically expressed priorities of the electorates on both sides of the Atlantic.
Thank you. And just a final note, taking advantage of, James, your comment about giving you our feedback, particularly on financial services. I would just say that we, as I said, we were very supportive of the negotiations in Trump 1.0 on US-UK, and we would hope that there would be the ability to build on the great progress that was made, particularly in financial services in areas like EPS. And so we hope that would be taken into consideration. But again, I know our time is now up, and I want to thank you both so much for your insightful comments. This was incredibly helpful. And as you know, as I said, CSI is a big supporter of the US-UK agreement going forward. You can count on us. And so we appreciate you both being here today, taking the time to join us. And I think all will join me in a huge round of applause. Thank you.